The CEO married for revenge, not love. But when he lifted the veil, everything changed. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. A pale winter sky hung above the city of Florence as the rain began to fall in silver threads. In a private suite at the top of the Voss Tower Hotel, the sound of ticking echoed between the marble walls. Alexander Voss, a 33-year-old CEO of Voss Atelier, stood by the window, his reflection sharp against the glass. His jaw was set, his eyes cold, yet there was something restless beneath that calm exterior. He had built an empire on precision and control, but tonight he was about to cross a line even he could not define. On the polished desk lay a single sheet of paper, an agreement, signed and sealed. The words at the top read, "Marriage Contract." At the other end of the room, Elena Marchand stood silently, clutching the handle of her worn leather bag. The gold light from the chandelier cast a soft halo over her face, turning the tears in her eyes into tiny sparks. She looked fragile, yet there was a quiet strength in the way she held herself. "You understand the terms, Miss Marchand," Alexander said. His voice was calm, rehearsed, businesslike. 6 months. Public appearances when required. No personal involvement. When it ends, you will receive the payment in full. Elena nodded slowly. "Yes, Mr. Voss. I understand." Her voice trembled slightly, but she did not look away. She had no choice. Her small design studio had collapsed after her father's death, and the hospital bills for her mother had drained every account she had left. She needed this deal, even if it meant tying herself to a man who saw love as a transaction. Alexander picked up the pen. "Then let us begin." As he signed his name, the ink bled across the gold-trimmed paper like a wound opening. When he handed her the pen, their fingers brushed for a second, just enough for him to feel that she was trembling. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Elena pressed the pen to the paper and wrote her name in careful strokes. A drop of ink fell from the tip and landed on her wrist. She wiped it away quickly, not realizing that the mark would stay faintly visible for weeks. He took the paper and folded it neatly into a leather folder. "The wedding will be private. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, at St. Michael's Hall. My driver will pick you up." She opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came. He was already walking toward the door. When it closed behind him, she exhaled for the first time in minutes. The air smelled faintly of rain and expensive cologne. She looked down at the paper still on the table, her signature shining faintly under the chandelier light. Somewhere deep inside, she whispered to herself, "You are doing this for survival." But as the night deepened and the rain turned the city streets into rivers of gold, she could not shake the feeling that she had just signed something that would change more than her name. Morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows of St. Michael's Hall, turning the marble floor into a sea of gold. The scent of lilies mixed with the faint echo of a string quartet. Only a few witnesses stood by: the lawyer, the photographer, and 2 assistants from Alexander's company. Everything had been arranged with clinical precision, as if this were a business merger rather than a wedding. Elena stood at the far end of the aisle, her dress simple but elegant. It was not made by a designer but tailored by a friend who owed her a favor. The soft champagne silk shimmered under the morning light. Her hands clutched a small bouquet of white roses. She tried to steady her breathing, but every heartbeat echoed like a drum inside her chest. Alexander waited at the altar, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. He did not smile. His eyes were unreadable, sharp as the edge of glass. When she reached him, he gave a slight nod. No words, no warmth. The officiant, a calm elderly man with silver hair, opened a book and began the ceremony. The vows were brief. No promises of love, no poetic declarations, just signatures and a golden ring sliding onto her finger. The camera clicked once, then silence. The moment the officiant said the words, "You may now kiss the bride," Alexander simply bowed his head in acknowledgement. There was no kiss, no applause. Only the rustle of paper as the lawyer folded the documents. Outside, the sky had cleared after last night's rain. The cobblestones glistened like polished glass. Elena stepped out first, holding the hem of her dress to avoid the puddles. The driver opened the door of a black sedan. Alexander followed, his expression unchanged. Inside the car, the silence was heavy. Florence passed by in soft blurs of gold and stone. Elena watched the city through the window, the bridges over the Arno River glowing in sunlight. For a moment, she wondered what her father would think if he could see her now married to a man she barely knew, wearing a ring that felt more like a chain. Alexander broke the silence first. "You will move into the estate tomorrow," he said, his tone purely professional. "There are events you must attend. You will receive a schedule by evening." She nodded, understood. He turned his gaze toward her, studying her profile. For a second, his composure wavered. She looked calm, but her eyes were distant, full of quiet defiance. It was not the look of someone defeated. It was the look of someone enduring. The car stopped before the grand gates of Villa Aurelia, his family's ancestral home overlooking the Tuscan hills. The ironwork gleamed under the sun, and rows of cypress trees lined the path like sentinels. As they entered, servants in uniforms greeted them with polite bows. "Welcome home, Mrs. Voss," one of them said softly. Elena froze at the sound of her new name. Alexander walked ahead without turning back, and she followed him through the golden halls, past portraits of ancestors who seemed to watch her every step. The room prepared for her was stunning high ceilings, cream drapes, and a view of the vineyards below. On the bedside table stood a framed photograph of a landscape, signed by Alexander himself. It was unexpected, almost tender. She touched the frame, then quickly withdrew her hand. When the door closed, she sat on the edge of the bed and whispered, "This is not love, this is survival." Oh, but as the wind carried the scent of jasmine through the open window and the golden light warmed her skin, she could not tell whether her heart was breaking or quietly beginning to hope. The following morning, the sun rose gently over the Tuscan hills, painting the villa in shades of champagne and gold. Elena woke to the sound of birds outside her window and the faint aroma of fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen below. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she saw the golden ring on her finger, and reality settled in again like a heavy coat. After a quiet breakfast served by a housekeeper named Clara, a black folder was delivered to her room. Inside was a typed schedule, stamped with the Voss Company seal. At the top, it read, "Mrs. Voss, Public Engagements, 6-month term." Every line was a social obligation: luncheons, charity events, board meetings. Elena stared at the paper, realizing her life had become another extension of his business. That afternoon, she stood before a grand mirror, while a stylist pinned her hair. "The dress must say elegance, not desire," the woman murmured, adjusting the champagne fabric. When she finally stepped out, Alexander was waiting by the staircase. He looked immaculate in a black suit, his expression as unreadable as ever. "You are punctual," he said, glancing at his watch. "Good. The foundation gala begins in 1 hour. You will stay by my side and smile when spoken to. Do not answer questions about our marriage." "I understand," she replied softly. They rode together in silence. The city glowed as the evening lights came on, flickering across the windshield. When they arrived at the hotel ballroom, a sea of gold and crystal greeted them. Cameras flashed, journalists whispered. To the world, they were the perfect couple, powerful, poised, untouchable. Alexander placed a hand on her back, a subtle signal for the photographers. His touch was light but firm, the gesture of a man playing his role flawlessly. Elena smiled politely, though her heart thudded against her ribs. Throughout the evening, she listened as investors and politicians praised Alexander's vision. He responded with practiced charm, every word measured. When one guest, an older man with a jeweled tie pin, leaned closer and said, "Your wife is quite the surprise, Mr. Voss. She has presence." Alexander only smiled faintly. "She exceeds expectations," he replied. For the first time, his voice carried something that was not sarcasm. Later, during a short intermission, Elena found herself alone on the terrace. The night air was cool, the city below glowing like a field of stars. She took a deep breath, finally free from the weight of watching eyes. Her hands rested on the marble railing. That was when she heard his voice behind her. "You handled them well," Alexander said. He stepped beside her, the faint scent of cologne and rain surrounding him. "I have attended enough charity events to learn how to smile," she answered quietly. He studied her face for a long moment. "Most people smile to hide weakness. You smile to endure." Elena turned to him, surprised. For a heartbeat, the distance between them faded. Then the music started again inside, breaking the spell. Alexander straightened his cuffs. "We should return." As they walked back, Elena caught her reflection in the glass doors, her golden dress, his black suit, their figures side by side like a photograph meant for a magazine cover. Yet beneath the perfection, something real had begun to stir. When the gala ended, they returned to Via Aurelia. The silence of the car felt different this time, not cold, not empty, but cautious. A spark of understanding flickered between them, fragile and unspoken. In her room, Elena stood before the mirror once more. The woman staring back looked composed, but her pulse betrayed her. She whispered to her reflection, "This is not what I expected." Down the hall, Alexander paused outside her door. He almost knocked, then stopped himself. Instead, he turned away, his voice low, as if speaking to no one. Neither did I. Days passed in quiet rhythm inside Villa Aurelia. The golden light of early autumn washed over the vineyards, and for the first time, Elena began to breathe without counting her heartbeats. She spent her mornings walking through the rose garden, and her afternoons sketching in the small sunroom that overlooked the valley. The air smelled of lavender and old paper, and for brief moments, she almost forgot her life was bound by a contract. One evening, while she was sorting through art books in the library, Alexander entered unexpectedly. He carried a folder under his arm and looked surprised to see her there. "I did not know this room was being used," he said. "I thought it was abandoned," she replied, brushing dust off a leather spine. "But it feels alive, somehow." He watched her fingers trace the edge of a book, and something softened in his expression. "My mother designed this room," he said quietly. "She believed every wall should hold a story." Elena turned toward him. She was right. There was a long silence, filled only by the ticking of a clock. Then Alexander placed the folder on the desk. "I came to show you something." Inside were blueprints, clean lines, delicate details. A project in Venice, a new art wing for the Devereux Foundation. "I want you to design the interiors." Elena blinked in disbelief. "May? You have taste," he said. "Not the expensive kind, real taste. People notice." She hesitated, unsure whether it was a compliment or another calculated gesture. "Why me?" Alexander looked at her steadily. "Because you see beauty where others see cost." Her chest tightened, and she could not think of a reply. He handed her the folder and turned to leave. But before he reached the door, she said, "Thank you." He stopped but did not turn around. "Do not thank me yet. It is a test." The following weeks became a blur of sketches, fabric samples, and long nights at the drafting table. Alexander occasionally appeared, reviewing her progress in silence. They spoke little, but each visit left traces: his coffee mug beside her notes, her pencil on his plans. Something fragile began to take shape between them, like the first light before dawn. One night, a storm swept across Tuscany. The power flickered, and the house went dark. Elena lit a candle and followed the glow to the corridor. She heard faint footsteps and found Alexander standing near the window, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his face caught in the flame's soft light. "You cannot sleep either?" she asked. He shook his head. "I never do when it rains." For a moment, they stood side by side, watching the lightning bloom across the hills. Then he spoke, his voice low. "My father used to lock the windows during storms. He said it kept danger out. I think he was wrong. Sometimes, danger lives inside." Elena turned to him, the candlelight trembling between them. "Maybe not danger," she said softly. "Maybe just fear." He met her gaze, and for the first time since their wedding, his walls seemed to crack. The thunder rolled, but neither of them moved. When the storm finally passed, Alexander took the candle from her hand. "You should rest," he said. As she walked back to her room, her pulse would not slow. In the quiet that followed, She realized that the line between pretense and truth had begun to blur. And somewhere deep inside, her heart whispered the question she had tried to ignore. Was this still a contract? Or had it already become something more? The next morning, Villa Aurelia woke to quiet sunlight after the storm. The air smelled clean, the vines glistening with dew. Elena entered the breakfast room expecting another day of silence. But Alexander was already there, reading the newspaper. He looked up briefly, then folded it neatly beside his plate. "You worked late last night," he said. "I could not sleep," she answered, pouring tea. He nodded. "Neither could I." For a few moments, they ate without speaking. Then he said, "I reviewed your sketches. The Venice proposal is extraordinary." She froze, unsure she had heard him correctly. "You liked them?" "I did," he replied simply. "You captured the light exactly as the city deserves. It feels alive." A faint smile touched her lips. "That means a great deal, coming from you." "Ah." He looked at her for a long moment, as if deciding whether to say something more. Then he stood. "We are attending a charity auction tonight in Florence. Be ready at 7. The evening unfolded like a dream wrapped in gold. The ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers. Guests whispered as Alexander entered with Elena on his arm. For the first time, she noticed how the crowd shifted when he walked. People admired him, but they also feared him. During the auction, the host presented a rare painting. Alexander raised his hand without hesitation, offering a price that silenced the room. When the hammer fell, he turned to her. "For your new studio," he said quietly. "Every artist needs inspiration." Her eyes widened. "You bought that? For me?" "Consider it an investment," he said, "in potential." "Oh." She wanted to thank him, but before she could, a tall woman approached them, a blonde in a silver gown with the kind of smile that hid knives. "Alexander," she purred, "you never told me you were married." Elena felt her stomach tighten. The woman extended a jeweled hand. "Margot Riviere, old friend." Alexander's jaw tensed. "Elena, this is Margot. We worked together years ago." Margot's gaze swept over Elena, polite but sharp. "How fascinating," she said. "And how sudden." The air thickened. Cameras flashed nearby. Elena forced a smile, her voice calm. "Life tends to surprise us, when we least expect it." Margot tilted her head. "Indeed, I wonder how long this surprise will last." Before Alexander could respond, Elena excused herself and stepped outside. Cool night air filled her lungs. She leaned against the marble railing, heart pounding. The city lights shimmered below, reflecting off the river like spilled stars. Moments later, Alexander joined her. "I am sorry," he said. "She should not have approached you like that." "She is someone from your past," Elena said quietly. "You do not need to explain." But he did. "We were engaged once. It ended badly. She will use anything to make me look weak." Elena looked at him, her voice soft but steady. "And marrying me was part of that war, was it not?" His expression shifted, guilt flickering in his eyes. "At first, yes." Her breath caught. "At first?" He stepped closer, the golden light from the ballroom spilling across his face. "It stopped being revenge the moment you looked at me like I was still human." The words hung in the air, fragile and heavy. She wanted to believe him, but the wound beneath her ribs would not let her. "Do not say things you do not mean, Alexander," she whispered. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Good night, Mr. Voss." She turned and walked back inside, her steps echoing softly against the marble floor. Behind her, Alexander stood alone beneath the golden lights, realizing that for the first time in years, he had said something that truly mattered. The next morning, the air around Villa Aurelia was heavy and silent. The rain had stopped, leaving the vineyards wrapped in mist. Elena woke early but could not bring herself to rise. Her thoughts felt tangled, like threads pulled too tight. She replayed Alexander's words from the night before, searching for truth in the spaces between them. When she finally went downstairs, she found a folded note on the dining table. It was brief. "I will be in Milan again. The Venice project presentation is tomorrow. I want you to come." She stared at the note for a long moment. There was no apology, no affection, only an invitation that felt like a question. The next day, she traveled to Milan. The company's headquarters rose above the city like a cathedral of glass and steel. Inside, everything gleamed in shades of white and gold. Assistants moved with quiet efficiency, their shoes whispering across marble floors. Alexander stood near the presentation stage, speaking with investors. When his eyes found hers, he hesitated for just a breath before returning to his composure. "You came," he said when she approached. "You asked," she replied. He gave a faint nod. "You will stand with me when I introduce the design. It is your work as much as mine." She almost protested but stopped. Perhaps this was his way of reaching out through pride instead of apology. When the presentation began, the lights dimmed. On the screen appeared her sketches of the new art wing in Venice, arched ceilings of pale stone, rooms filled with golden light reflected from the water. As the investors murmured approval, Alexander turned slightly toward her. "You see?" he whispered. "You built this." The applause that followed was genuine. Yet Elena felt something deeper than success stirring inside her. For months she had been trapped in a contract, her worth measured by appearances. But in this moment, standing beside him, she saw a glimpse of what they might have been if honesty had come sooner. After the meeting, they walked together through the quiet corridors. The city shimmered beyond the glass walls. "You were brilliant," Alexander said. "You gave them something real." Elena met his gaze. "And you gave them control. That is what you always wanted." He exhaled slowly. "It was, until you." They stopped near the elevator. The silence between them was fragile, like glass. She spoke softly. "I need to know something, Alexander. When you first asked me to marry you, did you ever imagine this moment standing beside me, not because of revenge, but because of respect?" He hesitated. "No," he said honestly. "But I imagine it now." "Doe." Before she could respond, a voice interrupted them. One of the investors hurried over, whispering something to Alexander. His expression darkened. "Margot has contacted the press," he said quietly. "They are printing a story that our marriage was fake from the beginning. They claim the Venice deal is based on manipulation." Elena's stomach dropped. "So everything we built will fall apart?" "Not if we face it together," he said firmly. "We tell the truth. No contracts. No lies." "Oh." She looked at him, searching for the man beneath the armor. "Then you had better mean it this time." He reached for her hand, his voice steady. "I do." For the first time, she did not pull away. The city lights reflected through the glass, wrapping them in a glow that felt almost holy. Somewhere beyond the noise of ambition and reputation, something pure had begun to emerge, something that looked a lot like love. The following morning, the headlines struck like lightning. Every major business paper carried the same photograph, Alexander and Elena, at the Venice presentation, standing too close, their eyes meeting beneath the caption, "Marriage built on lies? CEO faces scandal. Over contract bride." The word spread faster than wildfire. Reporters camped outside the Milan office, and camera flashes burst against the windows like tiny explosions. Elena sat in the conference room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Across from her, Alexander paced with the controlled fury of a man used to solving problems with precision, not emotion. "She planned this," he said. "Margot planted the story. She wants to destroy both of us." Elena looked up at him. "Then give them the truth, Alexander. Tell them why we married. Tell them what it became." He stopped pacing. "You want me to admit to the world that our marriage started as a transaction?" "Yes," she said softly, "because that is not where it ended." Oh, the silence that followed was heavy. Outside the glass walls, the press shouted questions neither of them could answer. Finally, Alexander drew a deep breath. "There is a shareholders' meeting tonight. I will make a statement. Will you stand beside me?" Her heart thudded in her chest. If we fall together. That evening, the grand hall of Vos Atelier glowed with golden light. Executives, investors, and reporters filled every seat. At the center of the stage stood Alexander and Elena, side by side. The murmur of voices quieted as he stepped forward to the microphone. He began calmly, his tone measured but clear. "It is true that my marriage to Elena Marchand began as a business contract. At the time, I believed revenge was strength. I was wrong. What began as a transaction became something real, something worth protecting. The crowd erupted in whispers. Cameras clicked furiously. Alexander continued, his voice steady. If anyone should take the blame, it is me. She owed me nothing, yet she gave me everything, a reminder that integrity and compassion are not weaknesses. They are the foundation of everything lasting. Elena felt tears sting her eyes, but she did not look away. When he turned toward her, the words came easily. I agreed to the marriage because I needed money, but I stayed because I found something that money could never buy: respect. The room fell silent. For the first time, their story was not whispered behind closed doors. It was spoken openly, in the light. After the conference ended, they walked out through the back exit, escaping the flood of reporters. The night air was cool, filled with the scent of rain. Alexander loosened his tie and exhaled deeply. We will lose contracts, he said quietly. Investors will walk away. Elena smiled faintly. Then maybe we will build something new, something honest. He looked at her, the golden lights of Milan reflecting in his eyes. You always find hope where I see failure. Someone has to, she said. For a moment, they stood beneath the soft drizzle, their hands brushing but not quite touching. The storm that had threatened to destroy them had instead stripped everything false away. Alexander reached into his coat and pulled out the folded marriage contract. Without a word, he tore it in half. The paper fluttered into the puddles at their feet. No more contracts, he said, only choices. Elena met his gaze, her voice quiet but sure. Then choose carefully, Alexander. He smiled for the first time in weeks. I already have. The city lights shimmered like liquid gold around them, and somewhere in that fragile silence, the echo of thunder faded into something softer, something that sounded a lot like forgiveness. 6 months later, Venice shimmered beneath the early summer Sunday. The air was warm and filled with the sound of church bells and distant laughter echoing over the canals. The new art wing of the Devereux Foundation stood open to the public for the very first time. Its marble corridors gleamed in gold light. The ceilings curved like open hands, welcoming everyone who entered. Inside the grand gallery, Elena moved quietly among the guests. She wore a soft champagne dress, simple but radiant, the same color as the morning sunlight that poured through the glass dome above. Every wall carried a piece of her work, her designs, her vision, her courage. The project she had begun in doubt had become something that inspired others to believe again in beauty born from truth. At the far end of the hall stood Alexander. He was speaking with a group of investors, his voice calm, his posture confident. But when his eyes found her across the crowd, everything else disappeared. He excused himself politely and crossed the floor toward her. The light caught his wedding ring as he walked, the gold glinting like a silent promise. You did this, he said softly when he reached her side. She smiled. We did this. He shook his head. No, Elena. You gave this place its soul. You taught me that honesty builds stronger foundations than power ever could. For a moment, they stood together, listening to the murmur of the guests and the gentle hum of life filling the space they had created. Then a familiar voice broke through the crowd. Margot Riviere, elegant as ever, holding a glass of champagne. I must admit, she said, her tone polite but tired. It is beautiful. Elena turned to face her, calm and unguarded. Beauty is not about perfection, she said quietly. It is about forgiveness. Margot hesitated, then gave a small nod before disappearing into the crowd. For the first time, Elena felt no bitterness, only peace. Later that evening, when the guests had gone and the gallery had fallen quiet, Alexander led her to the center of the room. On the wall behind them hung a framed page, their torn marriage contract, preserved under glass. Beneath it, a small plaque read, The Art of Forgiving. Elena laughed softly, shaking her head. You turned our mistakes into an exhibit? He smiled. It seemed fitting. Every masterpiece begins with an error someone refused to hide. She looked up at him, her voice warm. And what are we, Alexander? He took her hands in his. We are what happens when two people decide to tell the truth. The silence between them was full, not empty. Outside, the last light of the day melted into the canals, turning the water into ribbons of gold. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Before, I gave you a ring that symbolized a contract, he said quietly. This time, I want to give you a choice. He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold band, engraved with the words, "For always, not for terms." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "You do not have to do this," she whispered. "I know," he said, smiling. "That is why it means something." She nodded slowly, then held out her hand. "Then my answer is yes, without conditions." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It was lighter than the first, warmer, as if it belonged there all along. When he leaned forward to kiss her, it was not for the cameras or the contracts or the crowd. It was quiet, real, and filled with everything they had fought to find. A sudden cheer echoed from the courtyard, where a few staff members had been watching through the open doors. Someone popped a bottle of champagne, and laughter spilled into the gallery. Alexander glanced toward the noise, then back to her. "Shall we join them?" She smiled through her tears. "For the first time, I would like that." They stepped outside together, into the fading light. The bells of Venice rang again, soft and steady, as if blessing their beginning. Later that night, as the city lights danced across the water, Elena sat beside Alexander on the balcony of their small apartment overlooking the Grand Canal. Below them, gondolas drifted like shadows. She leaned her head against his shoulder and whispered, "Do you think people ever really change?" He took her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, only when they finally stopped pretending. The wind carried their laughter into the night. Beneath the warm gold of the Venetian sky, the past no longer hurt. What had started as a contract had become a promise written not on paper but in the quiet rhythm of two hearts that had finally learned the meaning of love.